Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin to open up conversations about art in the public realm and how we implement community arts in a diversity of public spaces that are changing in various ways, Steps Public Art wishes to acknowledge the sacred land on which we are hosting this meeting tonight. It has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. The territories include the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. The territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people. As a public arts organization, STEPS recognizes our privilege in working on stolen and unceded lands, and we value respectful collaboration with all the Indigenous peoples of the Turtle Island who have lived on this land for thousands of years and who continue to be our neighbors, friends, and colleagues. I encourage everyone to use the link that has just been provided in the chat box to learn more about the lands you reside on. Steps Public Art and the National Indigenous Media Arts Coalition, or NIMAC, are so happy to create the space for meaningful discussion. Before we get started, we ask that attendees please mute your mics during the panel discussion when you aren't verbally engaging with the panelists or the facilitator. At the end of the session, we will be screen sharing the event image for recording purposes only. You're welcome to leave the session whenever you're ready to do so at the end of this event. Please do not feel obligated to stick around until Steps ends the Zoom meeting. We mentioned this just because there is a bit of a lag between Facebook and Zoom, so it's a bit of an awkward silence. My name is Janet Hinkle. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a program coordinator with Steps Public Art. I have dark hair. I am a mixed race person of color with tan skin. I have a neutral colored shirt on, a gray background behind me with guitars hanging on the wall. Myself and Jennifer Smith from NIMAC will be available throughout this Zoom session should you have any questions or run into any tech issues. For those who are joining us via Facebook Live, please feel free to connect with Grace by commenting throughout the broadcast. Please feel free to use the chat function located on the lower right corner of your Zoom screen to ask questions throughout the session. During this event, our guest artists or members of the STEPS team may periodically encourage your participation. Please feel free to do so during these times if you feel comfortable doing so. Zoom's auto captions have been turned on. If you are joining us on Facebook Live and require captions, please feel free to join the Zoom session directly or turn on Facebook's auto captions feature on your screen. No hurtful behavior will be tolerated during this discussion. Should you wish to express any behavior of this sort, you will be removed from this Zoom session. The artist talk will be recorded for future use by Steps Public Art, NIMAC, and our guest artist presenters. And just a little background on Steps Public Art for those who are unfamiliar. The organization's mission is to transform underutilized public spaces through art and inspire other cities to reimagine their public spaces through large-scale art installations. By engaging Toronto's most diverse and underserved communities, we hope to strengthen the identity and character of the city's neighborhoods. This artist talk is being presented as part of the CreateSpace Residency's spring programming. CreateSpace is the National Public Art Residency program designed in collaboration with advisors from coast to coast to provide 10 emerging Black, Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and racialized artists and residents with the skills, relationships, and practical experience needed to take their public art practice to the next level. The 2021 CreateSpace Artists in Residence were selected by a committee of BIPOC identifying public artists and professionals from across Canada and were announced along with other residency news in April. To learn more about the program and the creatives involved, please follow the link that has just been posted into the chat box. I will now give the floor to Jennifer Smith of NIMAC to introduce herself and her organization. Jen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Smith, pronoun she, her. I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg. I'm very proud to call these my homelands and to walk on these lands that my ancestors have walked on and honor this space as my home. So just to describe my background, I am a white-skinned woman with brown hair, sitting in with a background of books and art and plants behind me. So I am the National Director at NIMAC, or the National Indigenous Media Arts Coalition. NIMAC is an organization that does advocacy specifically around the sector of Indigenous media arts, placing priority on supporting, promoting, and advocating Indigenous media artists and organizations within the context of media art practices on what is currently called the lands of Canada. I am really thrilled to be part of hosting this this discussion, or having been able to work with STEPS on this and have some of my favorite people here today talking to you. I'm going to introduce Fran, who is going to lead the conversation today. Franchesca Hebert-Spence is someone that I am very lucky to get to call my friend, along with colleague. So just to give you a little bit of information about Fran, her first engagements with art were as a maker, creating an emphasis on process and materials within her curatorial praxis. She is Anishinaabe, and her grandmother, Meagan Byrne-Spence, was from Sagkeeng First Nation on Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba. Kinship and its responsibilities to direct engagement, the direct engagement she maintains with her community, as well as her understanding of how institutions move and breathe. The foundation of this practice stems from Ishkadaben's Wasaga, sorry, Fran, Inabateg. I have said this properly before, at the Brandon University Visual Arts and Aboriginal Arts program. She has begun a PhD, she has begun as a PhD student in cultural mediations and visual culture at Carleton University as a fellow on the Morisseau project under Dr. Carmen Robertson. She's an independent curator and previously served as the adjunct curator of Indigenous art at the Art Gallery of Alberta and curatorial assistant within the Indigenous Arts Department at the National Gallery of Canada. So I'm thrilled to have Fran here, and also Bracken and Meagan. Thank you so much for this, and I'm going to hand it over.
Hey, thank you so much, Jen, and thank you so much, STEPS and NIMAC, for hosting us and opening up the space for us to have this conversation. And also thank you, Meagan and Bracken, for being here and having the opportunity to chat with you. I've loved both of your work for so many years, and you inspire me to think about the roles that institutions play and what our roles are as makers. So I'm really excited to chat with you this evening. I've said it like 4 times. I don't know how to emphasize it enough. So yes, would you like to introduce yourselves before we start discussing the questions? Because Jen has done a lovely job of introducing me. Yes. Okay, we'll introduce ourselves then. Bracken, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yo Lathnugwa Bracken Hanuse-Corlett, Gayethanugwa Wuikinuxv and Klahoose. So hi, I'm Bracken Hanuse-Corlett. I come from the Wuikinuxv and Klahoose Nations, which are 2 pretty small little communities on the central coast of BC. I've been working in the arts for over 20 years now. I started out in theater and then transitioned to media arts and visual arts. And I guess describing myself, I'm of mixed heritage, have a beard, black shirt, fluorescent toque, headphones. I have a speed bag behind me, and I have a license plate here with horsehair coming out of it, and that's a cedar paneled wall. So yeah, that's the physical description, and I guess I'll pass it over.
Tanti Meagan Byrne Apatwako Hamilton, Ontario Nutchin. Hi, I'm Meagan Byrne. I'm Apatwako or Métis of the Métis Nation of Ontario. And I was born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of the Six Nations. So that's where, I was raised pretty close to Mohawk country. And I am in a white wood paneled room with a white bed and two cloth posters, which are maps of Banff and Winnipeg, respectively. Yeah, that's me. Oh, wait, I guess I should say what I do. Right, so I'm a game designer. And I run my own studio, Achamos Dawastan Games. Achamos Dawastan is a Cree word, which means tell us a story. So we're Tell Us a Story Games. And I have been working in the arts for, oh my God, a decade now. I actually also started out in theater. I did lighting and set design, mostly lighting for concerts. I got to do metric once, which was really cool. And then, you know, when 2009 happened, I was like, where's the jobs? And it was video games. So I've been working in video games since about 2015. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and so to describe first of all, when I'm from Treaty 1 territory, like Jen, but I'm currently residing in unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa. And I've been here since the beginning of the pandemic. So my relationship to place has been a little bit disrupted, but I think the reprieve that I get is when I go off to the river and take a nap or sit in the sun or do some reading and thinking. And so I'm really grateful for the amount of green space, even though it's constructed, to escape the confines of the interior from. And to describe the space and myself, I am a light-skinned woman with long brown hair and glasses. I'm wearing a white shirt, and I am in a white room with white doors and an open door, which I should have closed before we started. So yeah, thank you so much. And let's begin the conversation. I think the first question that we wanted to begin with are, what are your favorite digital projects that you've built community within? I know the word favorite is like a strange word, but like maybe think fulfilling, or what was like one that really excited you or engaged you, or like something that you hold dear. I think like this idea around affect and care is really important when we're working in community, and we have a different like buy-in, I guess. So yeah, who would like to start?
So I actually think like my favorite, I guess I have two, but neither of them are actually digital. They were actually around creating. And the first one was for 2 summers, I did like video game summer camps with Indigenous youth in Yellowknife and Fort Smith up in the Northwest Territories. And like, that was really amazing, especially when we were in Fort Smith, because we would be able to go to like the park and stuff. And just like the kids were so smart and so engaged, and it was just really fun to see the stuff that they would come up with. Because one of the things I'm always saying in my practice is like, you know, a lot of what has been told to us is what is Indigenous art has been curated by non-Indigenous people, and there was always a really high pressure on especially Indigenous kids to kind of like almost become content farms, where they're pushing out more and more like content. And of course, there's this idea that it'll look a certain way. And I really fought hard, and I really love that, oh, I can't remember, WAMP, the Western Arctic Moving Pictures, they pushed back on their funders to give the kids space in order to just do whatever they wanted, which I was like, I really appreciated, and that kind of created a lifelong relationship between me and WAMP, because they care. And it was like so refreshing to just see somebody who actually, or a group, even though they weren't an Indigenous group, actually like listen when I was like, don't tell these kids what to make. like let them make what they want to make. And I was like, oh yeah, right. Like, so that one to me was like, I love this one. And that was, I think, the one that really got me excited, and kind of helped, actually got me involved with the Indigenous game dev community and started working as like a co-organizer with Beth LaPonce to sort of keep building that up and keep giving Indigenous people spaces where they can just do whatever they want and not be told how to present their work.
Cool. I think, yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite for me as well. But I would probably choose kind of a multi-year project that I worked on that was called Kutich, which means dance blanket. And so that the reason why I choose that one was because I was able to work with family. I was able to work with my Auntie Rose, who sewed a button blanket for me, and then I put the buttons on it. And I also worked a lot with my Uncle Dennis, who's our family's chief. He's passed away now, but it gave me that time to actually visit him in the community and work with him and understand a lot more about our family's like traditional responsibility in the community, which just something that I carry forward, just as something really, important responsibility. And that project actually started out at the Winnipeg Art Gallery with that digital print that was curated by Jamie Isaac for Insurgents Resurgence. So that was like, I can't remember what year that was now, but that's going back a few years as like my initial foray into learning more about my family's crest. So on the West Coast, we all have, or most of us have crests that, identify your family to the world outside. So I was learning a lot more about our family's crest, and that we hadn't had someone actually design our family's crest for the family in many, many years. So I was trying to recreate something from memory, but also research and just visiting. And then initially the initial exhibition actually went over to Brisbane, Australia, as part of a show with a big group of like Pacific artists. So it was really awesome just to be out there and to visit, Maori and different artists from these other places working with textiles, but also sometimes implementing digital work within that. So just finding like a community that was really far, but also being able to visit back home. And then eventually that was exhibited at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and my mom got to be there at the opening. So yeah, just projects like that really just are memorable. So that's the one I'll hold that one up for the gold medal.
I'm not a fast muter and unmuter. But yeah, no, both of those sound really community oriented and have a lot to do with like exchange, and exchange that doesn't function with like a hierarchy, and around relationality, which community building is a lot of what we do, and also what I respect so much about your practices. So I guess to kind of like flow a little bit, these are the ways that you connect to folks both near and far, and what your like responsibilities and I would say like obligations as we occupy these spaces. But what has influenced you, like in terms of like media?
You're muted.
Yeah, I got muted. That's okay. Yes, what experiences, what media has influenced you? For myself, I know like video games and anime have like created this unrealistic like friendship will overcome anything. I am a weeb, but it just, I know deep down in my heart when I feel injustice, I'm like, Naruto wouldn't deal with this. So I'm just curious, like, as we work in digital media and as we consume media, and our families and our communities and our loved ones have such a big impact on us. But I think there's also just this weird space where as like Indigenous folks, this idea around contemporaneity contemporariness. We're not really allowed, or not that we're not allowed, but it becomes like a statement to be like, I like Naruto. I grew up in the 90s, of course I love Naruto. So anyways, I'm rambling. What media has inspired you? Would you like to go, Bracken?
Sure. So muting there too. That's a good question. I think like I sometimes try not to look at too much because I don't want to be influenced as much. So sometimes I stay fairly insular besides what I see on Instagram. But I find myself really like, there's performance artists like Rebecca Belmore, Skeena Reese, my friend Janine Frayne-Jutli, Peter Moore, and like some of these like artists who I find have like such a brave yet gentle practice that even though I have done some performance work, but it's not my like forte. It's like, I always admire that kind of bravery to like just step out there and be like badass and gentle at the same time. So those are some artists that I really look towards. And then there's like, there's a number of like younger Northwest Coast artists who work digitally, but also like, with carving and things like that, that I'm just inspired by because I just see how hard they work, and they're kind of like, still emerging, but like just I find I look at their work there's too many to mention probably. And then also out in Winnipeg, there's two younger artists, Dallas Flett-Wapash and Taylor MacArthur. I really like just kind of like, we've been actually working with Dallas a little bit, and just, yeah, we're just kind of big fans of like their work ethic and just how they, they take care with their process with the community. And I think sometimes like digital art can lose that aspect, but I feel like just working with Dallas especially, but just seeing kind of Taylor's work from more far away, I just see that care that they're taking with their community, and really, yeah, I appreciate their work, and I guess it inspires me for sure.
So for me, like growing up in an urban setting, super far away from, so my family comes from like Moose Factory, Moosonee, and even from there, they like, I don't think anyone's left there in that area. They like moved away around like early 1900s, and so being really disconnected and kind of like knowing, but only finding out when I was about like, I think 12, that like it was this big embarrassing thing that my mom didn't want to talk about around that. But even before that, like, I mean, my aunt used to take me to like events and stuff, and I remember like being the annoyingest kid whenever the storytellers were there, because after they'd be done their sort of performance, I'd be like, do you have another one? Do you have another one? Like, can I get another one? Like asking for candy. And I know a lot of them were like, go away, kid, but I don't know, maybe I was just very cute. So they would like tell me like another story, and I would literally collect stories and like hoard them and play them back to myself and create worlds around them and put them in my sketchbook. And I kept dreaming of, when can I like live in a world like this? And then I played Okami from Clover Studio, and I was like, this is what I want, but Cree, like Métis, this is what I want. I want something that's just so saturated with our culture that you could take a year to just parse out everything in it and all the references, and just the fact that it, like, the music was based on traditional taco drums, that the art itself was based on sumi paintings, like just it was in everything. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And then I was in theater, so I was like, maybe I can do something with a set or like performances like that. But playing video games like that really made me realize that what I love about traditional Indigenous storytelling and Cree storytelling is that it's very interactive. They're always watching the audience. They're always like playing off, like if the kids don't look scared enough and it's supposed to be a scary story, we're gonna get something else. Or if somebody's getting too scared, or somebody's getting like really into it, you want to pull them in more or maybe push them back. And I was like, video games do that. Like interactive spaces, I think was the first time I started playing around in these game spaces. That's when I realized, like, oh, we can tell these stories, and we can tell these stories in a way that like recording them or writing them down just like does not do justice. Because at the end of the day, like they're not static. They're always dependent on who's in the room, whether you're an adult or a child, or you know where you're coming from, and that kind of energy. And I was like, oh, we can do such cool things with video games. So yeah, Okami was basically the first one that made me realize like this, we can do this.
Yeah, I was obsessed with Okami when I was younger. When I did the first run through and just realized that your score could tally and carry over, the number of run throughs I did as a kid was just terrifying. But also, I think this idea of brave but gentle, right? There's something just really so beautiful and captivating about the work. There's something that you can't really take your eyes off of. Either like, for example, Rebecca Belmore just commands a room. Rebecca like walks into a space and just owns it. And there's something about creating spaces and owning them, not compromising, kind of like what you were talking about with the youth in the workshop, and how do we create spaces where folks can explore. Yeah, okay, so now we can get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. So both of your practices focus on both of your bodies of work focus on and prioritize access while resisting the commercialization or commodification within art. By making something open access or free, it's also unacquirable. By default, when we think about public art, this is how both of you center how art serves community versus what we as individuals gain from it, or what kind of social currency or status currency that can be gained from it. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the ways in which you navigate those decisions, or how you came about those decisions, or even what strategies you would suggest for centering this like insurgent action, because both within public art and digital media, this idea that if it's online or if you're doing it, it should be for sale or it should be acquired. I also work within institutions, so like when I see things I like, I'm like, I should buy it, and it's like, but why am I doing that, and why am I doing that on behalf of a Western institution? This is recorded, so I'm probably not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. But yeah, like that's something that's been taught through like my occupation as a curator. And I also just really respect and appreciate when I respect and appreciate that in both of your practices. So anyways, who would like to go first?
So I would say, I guess like, because the way I think I make space, so I've been accused of being like timid. And I think a lot of that comes from an insecurity that, and I know I'm not like unique in this. I know a lot of, you know, even adopted go through this like, I don't have that secure connection to community. I need to be careful about how I step. I also like, I, you know, was lucky to be born into a middle-class family. I'm white passing. I need to be careful to know how I step. So I do kind of tend to be on the cautious side. Where I think I'm not cautious is when I'm like kind of talking to institutions, because they use that against us. They use that like, oh, you don't want me to take this away from you. And I was like, what are you going to take from me? I have all this privilege. So I was like, I'm going to use that. I'm going to like, you know, push back. I'm going to make space for others. And the way I kind of look at it is like, so with all this privilege that I have and all these kind of benefits that I've been getting, I'm still struggling to get stuff done. And then I kind of look at that as like, well, okay, so if I've got all this and I'm struggling, what about somebody who's like, doesn't even have close to that kind of access? So I kind of think of it in ways of like, let's make it as accessible for those that have the least in terms of like privilege and access. And also, I don't really have a problem with speaking up about things like, it's not going to look traditional. I'm not putting feathers on it. I'm not putting buckskin on it. Like, do I want to do those things? Yeah, sometimes I actually do want to do those things, but I also have to look at it as like, I'm not really, like, we've always been doing that. And we've always kind of like given over, and I am more specifically speaking about in like digital and video game spaces and those kind of funders, is, you know, in a lot of other medias like painting and sculpture, we're like, we want to do things, but we're also being told to do things that are like very much read as being like Indigenous. And I guess like me and my contrarianness is like, I don't want to do that. If you're going to make me do that, then I don't want to do that. And I think what I was seeing, especially talking to younger people trying to come in, is they don't even feel like they get a choice. Like, they don't feel like they can say no. And I feel like, well, you know, I'm already doing this work. People know who I am. So I might as well like, I don't think at the end of the day, I'm making a huge difference right now, but I do think I'm kind of setting a precedent, and I'm kind of being like, hey, you can push back. Or, you know what, also, if you like, you don't feel comfortable pushing back, maybe like see where you can play around within your own space. And I think that's also why I push really hard for things like the digital space at Imaginative, like, you know, the Indigenous game devs, like anybody who wants to show Indigenous digital media, make sure that's being kind of curated by Indigenous people. That also, like, you know, that thing with the kids group, the students, you know, saying that you can make it look however you want. Like, no one's going to tell you need to add anything. No one's going to tell you need to take something out. Like, if you want to do Grand Theft Auto res version and you just want to pull assets, do it. Like, I want to play that. I want to play what, you know, I want to play what people authentically want to make. I don't want something where somebody felt like, well, I had to make it like this, or I had to play up my pain, or I had to play up my like traditionist in order to like be seen. I was like, I want you to feel like I want you to feel like you're comfortable, like you're here, this is a space for you. Like, so that's really where I kind of like, maybe I can't do other things, but I can definitely do this. And I definitely have pissed people off. But whatever, I'll live.
Awesome. I guess for myself, when I think about this kind of like relationship with commodification, I think a lot about like the art form that I work in is commodified. It's purchased, it's consumed, it's like readily available, especially in Vancouver. And even like mentors that I've worked with under apprenticeship, they've all been like commercially successful artists. And I probably had like a pretty good bridge into that world. But there was always something that made me feel like my work, I didn't want my work in those kinds of galleries, or just to be making content or making images to just be consumed. And then, you know, you never really see them again, or they're worn on somebody's wrist, or they're probably just stored away in a lot of cases too. So I just didn't feel like that's not why I became an artist. Like I became an artist to connect with community. And you know, I still do like some commercial work here and there to I think when you work this way too, you always have to like have different options for, you know, making a living. But I think for me, especially like as I've gotten a bit more like confident in my own abilities as an artist too, I've been really wanting to work with youth, and really that's how I got started as an artist. Like when I was 18, just about to turn 19, I worked with Lance Belanger, who's a Maliseed artist, and Kitty Micah on this like public art project. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of experience with, you know, even drawing or like just pursuing art as a pathway. And that had such a huge impact on me that ended up kind of springboarding into working in theater, primarily Indigenous productions. And I saw one of Rebecca Belmore's performances when I was, I think 19, I just turned 19. And it's actually part of her retrospective show. And you can actually see me in the background, just like kneeling there. And I remember I saw it last time I was out in Toronto, and I could see myself just kneeling there. And I remember like what I was thinking, like while I was watching that performance, and just being like totally, like my whole world changed, right? So when I think about those moments, just being a youth and wanting to, just do my best to help open up those spaces. And I think what Meagan said too, like not trying to impose like the theme is this and you have to like, make work that talks about reconciliation or something. Like I think it's really important to give the youth their own like agency and time to like figure out what they actually want to say with their work. And sometimes it's not going to be like what an institution or an organization wants, but I think it's important to like just let them have that time to figure that out. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the projects that I recently did was the digital mural project, and we did a call for youth, which we deemed 0 to 29. So like we have some works by like some really youngins, which is so wonderful, and it was so great. But yeah, we did have like a call with a theme for folks to respond to. So this conversation around agency and how do we create spaces that are conducive to the conversations folks want to have. Yeah, oh, that's really interesting. That's making me reevaluate my projects now. This is wonderful. Yeah, I think we're also talking a little bit about commodification from Western institutions or non-Indigenous audiences who want to consume. So for folks out there, if you want to read something that's about consumption and you want to like educate yourself some more about this, read Hungry Listening. It's about music, but it is applicable to all forms of cultural production, and it is gold, absolute gold. So just a quick little thing. And I think that also leads a little bit, my video, this is going to be an ongoing thing, I'm sorry. Another thing that I guess a vein or a thread that's coming through is when we're compensated or paid to go and work within community, that's still working as a commercialized thing, and we're reimbursed and we're compensated for the labor that we do in those spaces. But it feels different because it's for us and for the youth. We also like learn so much and when we're in those spaces around what our priorities are. But I think that this conversation around customary work and artwork and digital work and commercial work creates like these divisions, but in reality, most of these works are for our community and for ourselves. And so when we create, we're sometimes forced or pushed to talk about our work within digital spaces or whichever spaces that we're occupying at that moment as something that's disparate from customary work. So you were taught carving, Bracken, Meagan, you were taught theater, and also pushed to like perform this like authentic, large quotations there for folks who cannot see, the bunny ears are out, authentic indigeneity. So, and I'm using the word customary rather than traditional because traditional makes it seem historicized, and it's not. There are folks who are making work to this day. I bead. I know folks who do tan hiding, tan ampersandy. That was the worst gesture. I've never done a hide before, and do not have the arms for it. The most piddly. But if the work we do as cultural workers or cultural producers is about building community, is it really that fundamentally different than what we're supposed to be doing as community members? And I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are. You can also like totally disagree and be like, it is very different, or these are the conditions that I think they need to exist within. Who would like to go first? Oh, I thought you were putting.
Is that me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think like when I think about how I started my carving apprenticeship, I was working with Bradley Hunt, his sons Sean and Dean, and they're all three of them really like renowned carvers and artists in their own right. Sean is more of like a, I think he's viewed in this different kind of contemporary world in a way. And the thing is, like the three of their work, I really feel like it's all like totally aligned, and they're like Voltron, like when they assemble. And I happened to be related to them, and I just started kind of like dropping by their studio, and I was like, I really wanted to start carving. And I think that's like a lot of younger like Indigenous folks on the coast, they want to start carving for various reasons. And so when I walked in the studio, I was just kind of like dropping in, and then I remember Sean just kind of came over to me, and he's like, why do you want to carve? And he's like, because if you're in it for the money, we don't want you here. And so, and it was kind of like, it was a shocking like thing to say, but I was like, that's not the reason why I want to carve. I wanted to carve for family potlatching, for actually not really for a monetary value. But through my apprenticeship, I realized like carving takes so much time and energy that it's almost impossible to do for free, right? Like, so when I have done carvings, that they've always gone as gifts, but it's like they take forever for me to make, because I have to kind of like slot off that time, where I can go out to the studio. And what I knew was that I didn't want like to be carving and then to bring that stuff into Vancouver, into one of the more like commercial tourist oriented galleries. I knew like that wasn't the pathway for me. And I think like I moved into digital like pretty quick, or like at the same time while I was carving. And I think the whole path has been to basically connect those two things. And they don't always go together, I don't think, but like the work that I've put in and the work that my mentors have put into me as well, I think like makes it kind of fuse a little bit sometimes better than other times. But for me, that's like always a question that I ask in myself too, of like, is this so much different than spending 6 months with a mask or something like that? Like, it is the same amount of labor often, or even more. And then a lot of the steps or like technique that I'm using still comes from that like source of like, yeah, customary. I like that word. I've always tried to avoid like those binaries between traditional and contemporary. So yeah, I think for me, it's not really I think something I can fully answer, but it's like a kind of an enduring question. Yeah.
So like when I first got started in games, despite the fact that I did see it as a way to tell stories, I was kind of looking at it as, this is just where the jobs are. And literally being like broke for so long and like hustling and struggling constantly in theater, getting nowhere. I was just like, I just need to eat. But when I was in, oh man, I think like the summer of my second year, or maybe it was even my first year, because I went to the game design program at Sheridan. Indigenous Roots, which they're not really active right now, but they were like a Indigenous New Media collective out of Toronto, kind of headed up by Archer Pachawis. And they put on something called Indigicade, which was basically a video game boot camp for Indigenous kids and mostly girls and women. And like, I'm old, so I was like, because they said the cutoff was like 25. And I'm like, I was 30. So I was like, can I come? Like, like, you don't have to report me or anything. Like, they're like, no, it's fine. You come. So I did. And I got to meet Archer, and I got to start working on games in a space that actually started with an elder praying. And that was like the idea of doing work in a space where I didn't have to justify why I was making design choices was so foreign to me. Yeah, actually, I think it was after my second year, because I remember it came right on the tail of me having a fight with one of my character art teachers about, and it came down to that, like, oh, it doesn't look native, because I wanted to do like a native RPG, and I had this character who her outfit was based off of a combination of like a poncho and this one fancy dancer's shawl that was like this bright orange and blue with flowers on it, and I like loved it. Like every time she was there, I was like front row watching her dance because I loved her outfit so much. And I was basing it off of her, and this guy who didn't know anything about powwows was telling me how it should look, and I was really frustrated. And then Indigicate happened, and for the first time, not just making it in a space where I wasn't being told to justify my design decisions, I was also starting to realize, like, you know what we can do with digital spaces, especially interactive ones? We can use mechanics to talk about things that are too difficult. And actually, like, my very first piece, Anishinaabe and Lost, is like the most emotional thing I think I've ever made, because it's literally about me not knowing how am I supposed to reconnect when it's been very, like, that relationship has been heavily severed, and heavily severed within only like 2 generations, like I guess 3 with my mom. Like that was, to me, thinking about how quick, and how, I guess, even like also like you're reaching out, it's so close but it's so far. And so I did a game about that. I couldn't talk about it without crying. So I was really happy to be able to express it, and I actually got a lot of anxiety out just making this little game that's just this, it's just a dumb little platformer. But it was a dumb little platformer that let me kind of express myself in a way that, one, I didn't feel like I'd have to explain myself if somebody took issue with, using the wrong words, or you're not expressing it correctly. Like, you can express trauma correctly. And then, like, also, like, there was stuff I just didn't even know I could say. So, but having a character act it out, I was like, this is amazing. And like, this is what I liked in theater, but I could play it again and again and again. I didn't need a partner to do it. I could play on my own. And that really got me thinking about the importance of these spaces, and the fact that nobody here told me how to make things. Nobody, like Archer just wanted us to have fun. And nobody was telling me, like, you have to do this and it has to be about this. It just ended up that I wanted to talk about that. And so I always think about that when I kind of make spaces and when I make work. And I think when it comes to like the idea of around commercialization, because I am working on a commercial project right now. I'm working on Hill Agency, which is a detective game. Part of that was because we wouldn't have been able to fund it otherwise. And my issue is not ever with commercialization, because I think about, what you're saying, like, oh, we go into these spaces and we get paid. I was like, but I would have been paid even if we were living a more, what was the word you used? Not traditional.
Customary.
What?
Customary.
Customary. Yeah, if we were living a more customary life, like if we hadn't been put through these sort of ringers of like, you have to use money, I would have been given gifts for exchange. And sometimes I'm like mad that I don't get, like, to get a half a moose would be the best thing ever. Literally, you would not have to pay me anything. I would just take that. But like, you can't really, I don't know, on one hand, it's like, yeah, that would be great, but I have to pay for my rent. And so like so the being paid in exchange for work, that one I didn't have a problem with. But I think what kind of like Bracken was saying with like, are you only in it for the money? And for me, it's like, I'm willing to take hits on stuff in order to make sure the work gets done. But also like my concern is more around like the expansion of capitalism is my problem, like having to always make as much money, trying to always wring every dollar or cent out of that experience. Like for me, that's what I have a problem with, is when it's sort of like you're only doing it and you're abusing labor of other people, or you're using youth to just wring stories out of them so you can in turn make money off of a project. Like, you know, I see it's not just youth, it's also like our elders, our story keepers. Like I do see this happening, and those are the things where I was like, that's not commercialization, that's something else. That's capitalism, because you're treating them like resources, you're not entering into relationships, you have no intention in staying in or taking care of them, bringing them in, giving them more opportunities. Like for me, like with the kids I was working with summer camp, none of them wanted to go into games, but I was like, here's my email, here's my phone number. Like if you ever want an opportunity, you call me up. They probably lost it by now. It's been 3 years. But I was like, I'm not just coming in here to teach you stuff and just like mama bird vomit in your mouth with knowledge. Like if you, sorry. But I was like, but that's like, sometimes that's what I felt like I was being asked to do. Just like, don't create a relationship, don't get to know them. Like that for me, I'm like, if we're creating a relationship and you happen to be paying me, like that, and like I sit okay with that. If it's something where it's like, just show up, just do your job, just be our native face, here's your check, that I'm like, that's like, no, I don't like that. It did happen a lot when I think I was younger, because you're dumb when you're younger and you kind of trust people when they say they have good intentions, and you're like, because you're hopeful, you want. Also, like I'm definitely one of those summer child sometimes where I'm just like, okay, let's do this thing, and then they're like, oh, so yeah, so I'm better maybe. But yeah, that's kind of where I sit in that space about like commercialization versus capitalism, where it's like, are you creating relationships? Are you taking care of your people? Are you taking care of the people that you're working with on that project? Or are you just trying to wring whatever value you can get out of it? And as soon as as soon as the transaction's over, this relationship's over, and that's where I draw the line, because like you gotta get paid. So I try to find those places where you're getting paid in a way that's not damaging. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there are two veins that are like happening in this conversation. How do we individually like build relationships, and like what are our social obligations? And so some of that is like insurgent actions within institutions when you see that behavior happening. And then it's also inserting yourself within these systems and acting as a buffer and holding folks accountable. But then another way through it is I think when I talk about commercialization, I think that wasn't the right word. I think it has to do with the power that comes with folks expecting you, or people wielding power when they employ you or they purchase from you or create space. So this is like a power dynamic that I have to be aware of as a curator. Because it's like, I have this show, but I want you to do this. Like, how do you enter into these relationships, or how do you build trust with folks before asking them if they're comfortable going into a space, right? How do you share intentions? Like, for example, I can do studio visits. I like to do studio visits when I don't have a project on, because it's less weird. All of these interactions are rooted in power, and we can say, oh, I'm a curator that doesn't believe in the hierarchy and I don't participate in it. But essentially all I'm doing is ignoring it. and ignoring the power and ignoring like the discomfort that I might be putting artists in. So when if there are any institutions here listening, I think ignoring power isn't the way to go about it. It's knowing that you wield power and that when you ask these questions, they're harmful. When you ask, and if you want to ask them, preface it with like, I don't expect you to do this. I'm just wondering, why is this person designed this way? Because I want to know more, versus like, they're not Indian enough. Like, those are different explorations and those are different conversations. And how do you build trust? I like to snack and chat. I prefer to like do these things over food. If we were in the same space, I would have like insisted that we went for dinner ahead of time. Jen would have facilitated the whole thing because Jen's way better at this than I am. But like the relationship building is so important. And yeah, and especially when we're in digital spaces, it's so easy for us to just get to business. But like, how do we ask like about each other's kids or how their personal lives are going, or, you know, how are you feeling? And doing like an honest check-in. I think those are just like some of the smallest ways to build relationships. And that's how we build community. And those are the things that you both seem to be searching for or enacting. And then also holding institutions at arm's length when they are stepping too far and they are trying to grab. And yeah, I think these are really important lessons, because especially for folks who like, I am like a person who grew up in CFS and I was raised by 2 white newfies. Yeah, that face is real. I love them lots. But yeah, it was an experience, and I have a bunch of terms about molasses in my vocabulary that I will never unlearn. But just identifying and knowing what I don't know, I think is just a really important step, and being like reciprocal to, or not reciprocal, but being open to critique, or knowing that like there are really colonial ways that I think sometimes, and things that I don't understand, but I also have like a really wonderful set of like colleagues who hold me accountable and will tell me when I'm like not being great. And yeah, I don't know, this is like a ramble, I'm so sorry you guys, but I think it's really important when we're talking about building community, but also building capacity to fail, because failure isn't like the be all end all, we all fail. It's the power dynamic and how you wield that power dynamic when you're told that you fail. So if you go to an institution, or if you go to a curator at a gallery that's being like, hey, Bracken, can you please make me 5 masks? I don't care, just call them something wolf. Like that's, and I know I'm saying that, but I also know somewhere out there, someone has had that interaction. It's how do we create an arts community? How do we create a space where we can say, you know, so-and-so, that thing that you said like a few years ago made me feel really unsafe. It made me feel really like unappreciated. And it was really disrespectful to like the stories and the history and the work that like my community does. Like to be able to return to that conversation and have a conversation, I think would be like amazing. That's where I dream things could be, and to not see it as like an angry thing, but like essentially you're demonstrating care by telling them that they did wrong, and you have faith that they will adjust or listen or like internalize that somehow, and like not in a harmful way. So like strong but gentle. So yeah, I guess also another thing we can talk about, and we don't have this prepped in the notes, but I know we use the word community really loosely, like community this, community that, and my community is my Winnipeg arts community, or like the Brandon community. My Brandon community holds me accountable, holy heck. But like I love it, and I love that they like see what I do, and follow and make sure I'm doing things in a good way. That's so much love. That's so much work. Like, but there's also like a wider arts community that includes non-Indigenous folks that I want to see like come forward. But then there are also ways that I'm not coming forward for other folks, and I've been like tasked with. So how do you, this is a big question. It is totally out of left field, but based on like what we're talking about, what are some ways that you define community, or like when you're talking about community and you use it, what is it in specifically that you're thinking? Is it purely relational, or is it, what's your scope? What are some of the ways that you define community? Or like, what would your scope be? Or like the ways that you've been using it this evening? Thanks, sorry, that was a long ramble.
I'll jump in. I think like there's this community at large, like the greater arts community. But I find like I really like it does go more to I place more importance on my family, and they're not always going to like everything that I'm doing. Like when I started out as an artist, I think they thought some of my stuff was pretty weird. And like my uncle Dennis, who I mentioned earlier, he was such a big influence on me on working harder to look at the work of our community and our people, because I had some influence from my apprenticeship and just being younger and just being kind of influenced by other styles and things like that. So he really like humbled me and brought me back to like almost like a starting place. And so like my family community is super important to me, but then there's also there is like the Indigenous arts community, and just even like when we're talking about the youth, I think those are like the communities I hold like as being important. But then when you're talking about like standing up for other people as well, I think that is like something I'm still like trying to be more aware of, like standing up for other causes and peoples is so important. And then it's like also trying to take care of yourself in that, and not, because it can just be full time, like just with everything going on. But I think it is important that when you can make space for those people that you have to. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm kind of like losing my train of thought, so I'll pass it over.
Yeah, if you ever figure out how to start relationships without doing it in a harmful way, I would really I need a protocol, because like I know for me, one of the things that so no one told me like stop doing this, but I definitely I've been hurt, and I'm pretty sure I've hurt others by like being really excited about wanting to work with somebody and then immediately jumping into working on something rather than like, and it was, obviously like they also were too excited, but now I'm seeing like what were those relationships that did really well when we decided to finally work together. And I was like, we'd been friends or known each other for years before we were like, or even like a year before we were like, hey, let's start doing work together. And I think when you're disconnected, because like I do have family, but we're all right now kind of doing the work of connecting with our larger family, the Thomas Vincents, and it's sort of a weird space of doing a lot of work, thinking more about the future generations and the communities they'll have rather than the communities I'll have right now. So I do know that some of that insecurity from not having that quick, or I guess, no, maybe not quick, like entrenched community, where you kind of feel secure in that this exists and it's behind me and I know it's there, because like I don't know where it is. That insecurity, I think, sometimes like leads me to jump too quickly into relationships with people I connect with, because I was like, oh my God, you're doing cool stuff. Like, and they're like, you're doing cool stuff. We're like, let's do cool stuff together. And then we're like, this is not working because we don't know each other and we don't really know how each of us work. And we're not really giving space to that time that we needed in order to like get to know whether or not this would, you know, work out. I know I'm somebody who's like, my voice sounds like you can't argue with me. And that can really be like triggering to some people when they're, because like just in my household, like it was loud, so like you got you got loud in order to be heard. And so in space, so I think that's why when I'm talking with sort of institutions, I do well, because I did kind of come from that background of like not being afraid to speak up and not afraid to get loud if someone gets loud with me and that kind of thing. But doing that with somebody who like that brings up a lot of pain, and not being conscious of each other and not being aware of like how you may trigger each other, because we're all dealing with trauma, and then just creating these like spaces of anger is something that I think, like, I'm still pretty new, I think, in the art scene, for like especially the Indigenous art scene. So it was like not something anyone took me aside and was like, just so you're aware, you need to be careful about this stuff. And I think part of that is because mentorship is this weird thing that just happens for like one thing, and then no one's ever kind of sit you down and talk about like, this is how you're supposed to behave in these spaces. Like I don't really see those conversations happening. It's more when I see a mentor or when I'm working with a mentor, we're focusing on the work, less on, you know, how do you do the work of creating community. And I think in some ways it's because the way we've always done it is through example, but how are you supposed to do that when you're not able to kind of just be around these people all the time? And a lot of times also it's happened to me, I've seen it happen with other younger Indigenous people, like you kind of get pushed immediately into a spotlight. And then you're kind of expected to just know how to perform in these spotlights with all these people coming at you. And you're like I messed up, like definitely like spoke out of turn, said things I didn't understand what I was saying, didn't know how to ask for space to not be in that spotlight anymore. Feeling also like if you're not in that spotlight, you're a disappointment to like these people you don't even know, who are just like, you're a shining beacon of our like this community. I was like, I don't know anybody here. Like, can I maybe not be in the spotlight, and not feeling comfortable saying no, because it was like, well, everyone's counting on me. I don't know who everyone is, but I was like, this nebulous. Yeah, so I think also like the examples sometimes that are set in art communities are like not healthy, because I think there's also an assumption that you just understand or you just know. And I was like, we need an orientation. Like, here's interacting with like Indigenous Artists 101. Are you new? Come over, we'll talk to you about it. And it seems silly and like, oh, too formalized. But one of the things I've noticed is, you know, a lot of us are coming from different communities and different nations, and we have different protocols. And I mean, one of the things my friends and I always joke about is, how do you start a fight in a drum circle? You ask people how they rest their drum. So it was like, because some face down, some up, and like you will get a fight, you will get a fist fight. Yeah. But I was like, that's a really good example of what I'm not seeing in like a lot of art spaces, especially when it's like a lot of us coming from totally different protocol areas and understandings of ways of how to interact in a polite, respectful way, is like people are getting upset and feeling unheard, feeling disrespected, when that other person was like, this is what I do in my community to show respect. And then in somebody else's community, that might be the most disrespectful thing you could do. So like, that's something I was like, needed. And I don't think because we talk about those kind of things that any of my mentors realized that I was missing that kind of knowledge, and that in a way I'm almost being set up to fail, because, you know, the damages to relationships you do when you're a young artist coming in, those last throughout your entire career. Like, people don't forget. And especially because no one knows you, who's going to sit you down and be like, hey, what you did, not okay. We need to talk about that. Because they like, I don't know you. Why do I need to build this relationship with you? You've already hurt me. So I was like,
Yeah.
What have I done?
Yeah, no, I think it also comes to, as we have community practices, like these relationships are seminal to them. And I think this kind of like plays, I think there's some questions around like collaboration and relationship building. So I think one of the things that we talk about is also like we've all situated like what our lived experiences are, like this been really open about like disconnecting and learning, or like having these amazing carvers and this space and time inside of inside like a community, like that's so beautiful. And I like, my little heart yearns for like your experience, Bracken, but I also recognize that like where I come from and the things, like we have our own experiences, and they're all Indigenous experiences. They aren't real or unreal. And the transparency, I'm not any less permissed or allowed in this space because of the way that I grew up. I just need to recognize that I'll see things differently, and the work is different, but we're all learning and we're all walking towards it. Actually, Archer was an individual who, when I had met him, I was like, I've been thinking a lot and talking a lot about Wuikinuxv, even though I'm Anishinaabe, who was taught by Métis, but like, you know, this recognizing and identifying like what those, like the differences and the ways in which I entered these spaces, and this engagement with Wuikinuxv, and why like in my little sad CFS orphan heart was like, hey, this is an idea that really like I wanted, or not wanted, but something that I aim or strive or want to engage with. Understanding the rationale by understanding me. And I think that honesty and that yeah, this pressure to perform from like institutions or hierarchies, like we don't, like that Drake meme right now, although he's a terrible human, that's kind of, we know ourselves, and we understand that we have things to bring to these conversations that aren't authenticated or can be quantified. But the are going to start the Q&A session. Unless there's something else that you guys would like to add to that. Like, I think this conversation around identity and like legitimize like identity is very on it right now, which is terrifying. Not terrifying. I think it's really important that we're having this conversation, but it does cause a lot of anxiety with folks who are like re-engaging, or folks who are white passing. And it's a conversation that I have had so many times. And yeah, in some ways I feel bad, not bad, but I feel like there's something missing by me not going back and reconnecting or engaging with family that I have in Seguin. But that's like such a raw experience. And I don't know if I'm emotionally ready. Like, what if I do lash out and I harm people and I cause this like irrevocable like tear in folks that I'm kin with? So what's I think like this question around identity and stuff like that. If there's anything you'd like to, so you'd unmuted, Bracken.
That's okay. I think, yeah, like it's also important for me to mention, I think like my mom grew up in foster homes and was eventually adopted after being in the residential school. So yeah, like our family definitely experienced that disconnection and just like that's why I didn't grow up in my home communities. And so my entire practice, well, I hate calling it practice sometimes, but just my pursuit of being an artist has like led me back to my home communities. And you can't just walk into those communities, like you're saying, like I always step quietly and just kind of sit in the corner and listen as best I can. And I don't, I still struggle with that, like feeling like sometimes whether I belong, even though I have family telling me that I do. But I think like, yeah, we're all in our own kind of place with that comfort and willingness to do that. And even my mom has been like surprised that like when I was younger that I just went there by myself. And she's like, because there is like a lot of trauma in our family with our experience of being like displaced from that community, from those communities. So it's been harder for my mom even to go back and be there, right? So yeah, I think with like identity, I am fortunate that I've had like so many loving family members to help build me up, but I know that we're all in like a different journey that way. And I know lots of people that are definitely struggling with like the current kind of atmosphere, I think, around getting called out. And, you know, some of it's legit and then some of it is completely, I think, off base. So it's not a very safe time to be vulnerable too. Like, I think that's like one of the things that I've realized is like, we're almost really expected to kind of show this strength that I know who I am, where I'm from. And it's kind of a dangerous time to be vulnerable about that. And it's scary, especially I think for some youth that I work with a lot of youth who have been, you know, displaced from their communities as well. And to think about them going through this kind of atmosphere as well, that isn't very caring. Yeah, I'll end it with that.
Yeah. How do we navigate these spaces with care, and how do we ask these questions in a way that doesn't how do we make it practice so it doesn't become like an isolating thing? And yeah, when we talk about like finding a protocol or like a little guidebook, that's that would definitely be something I would want in there. Okay, I think there are a couple questions in the chat and we have 10 minutes. One of them is, how do you feel about non-Indigenous people facilitating projects and organizations that center Indigenous? Is that overstepping or is it welcomed? Would you like to? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my main thing is just, I guess when you're doing it, just consider like, do you have an end goal in mind already? Or are you listening to what the artists are saying? Are you opening up? Are you like opening yourself up to a relationship? Like, even if it doesn't last, like, are you at least open to it? One of the things I'm always telling people is like, are you okay with hearing no? Like, you know, just be okay with hearing no. I'm speaking specifically less about curation and more about like people who kind of want to have an Indigenous person on a digital project. Is a lot of times I'm seeing people already have their like prototype done. And so you're like, well, why am I here? Like, what do you want from, like, what exactly do you want from me then if you're not even wanting to start the project with me? But I mean, like I'm a part of the Toronto game dev scene, and like they're all freaking amazing and they're super welcoming and they just like love people in their projects. So when groups like Hand Eye Society or Dames Making Games put on things and they're not Indigenous groups, they're usually like, I just want you to show you. And like, to me, that's great. But what I do see with a lot of people who are like, I want to make space for Indigenous people, is more like, I think this will be really profitable if I have a show that's all Indigenous people doing digital stuff. So I think it's like, no, I guess like know your your motive. Like, what's your motive? Where is it coming from? If you just want to create a space, you probably won't have a problem because you won't be offended by a no, because you won't be worrying about, oh, this doesn't look right, I'm not going to get enough views from this. And like, also, I guess maybe like money is not always the reason. Like sometimes it's like about views. It's less about I made $1 million, and it's more about like we had 100,000 people show up, and that was like, so for me, that's how I kind of look at it.
I'll just echo that. I don't really have much to add.
Yeah, I think this idea around ethics rather than methods is really important, because it's also not our responsibility to vet you. I'm just talking like a hypothetical view, all the institutions out there. It's not our responsibility to vet you. And it's really soul searching around what's motivating you and what are the ways in which like power is being wielded. And I think those are really important questions. What kind of communication is happening? So I think that's a bit of a way to go through. And then also, I think we've been touching about it a lot. I think there is a question about there's a question around tokenism and walking away from experiences and reconciling them. I also realize and want to acknowledge that we're all working artists within a really small community. And when we talk about these experiences in public spaces, especially recorded ones, it can be damaging to our careers or become some sort of like news headline. And those are really important questions that we should ask, and like we tell, and we have a whisper network. It's really great, tap into it. But whether or not we feel comfortable answering the question or going into details around it, it may just be a yes or no thing because of that reason. But this is the Noor Bango wrote this really great article in Galleries West about the year-end review of the ways that artists have like used refusal within institutional spaces and the power of refusal. So if you want to read it or want to find more articles that talk about that, that's a great one. It's really well written. But if you too would like to say yes or no or go into more detail, that would also be, I'm muting.
Okay. I'll just say, like now that I'm in my early 40s, I think I recognize when I'm being tokenized a lot more these days than I did when I was younger. It's interesting when you talk about refusal, because there was a couple-year period where I said, I'm going to say yes to every single thing that I'm asked, like for work. And I ended up like totally burning myself out. But the result of that was like, you know, usually jobs snowball into other jobs and maybe better things come in the future. So I think it worked, but it didn't work because I realized I was being taken advantage of by usually, not specific, not exclusively, but it was usually maybe non-Indigenous organizations who wanted kind of maybe to check a box, it felt like. And then the remuneration was always fairly low. When I think about it now, I'm like, you know, even at the time I knew it was low, but now when I think about it today, I'm just like, why was I doing that? And I think walking away is always an option you should keep. And these days, I usually am able to walk away before I get involved. But even, you know, in the last few years, I've definitely been involved in some, you know, public projects or projects with organizations where I wished I had just kind of listened to that intuition beforehand to walk away. And sometimes I just will finish the project and just, you know, not burn the bridge, but just be like, okay, I don't want to work with them again, because you become aware of the relationship maybe later on or like midway through. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a full answer, but it's kind of how I've looked at it myself.
Yeah, I think like I'd echo a lot of that. I think also you can apply a lot of the techniques that you can find online from things like Ask a Manager and stuff about just toxic workplaces. Like you also have to look at like, is this the first thing that you noticed about a bigger problem, or is it like an isolated incident? Is it, do you feel like you can talk to anybody there who makes decisions about it? If you can't, that's usually a good indication that maybe this is not a good place for you. So, I mean, for me, because I was dealing with, you know, near poverty for a little while, I did definitely stay in things because I didn't think I had the option of saying no, because I was afraid of being like without a job. So I guess also like know where you are in your kind of safety net. Do you have a safety net? Do you feel comfortable utilizing your safety net? Sometimes just talking about it with people in your community can kind of give you techniques. But I really think like a lot of the knowledge around dealing with unsafe or difficult workplaces helps a lot with these kind of things, because the techniques are going to be pretty much the same. Like if you feel like you really don't want to be here, regardless of where it is, it's just not a good fit for you and you can walk away. Take it. If you can't walk away right now, are there steps you can start putting in place so you can safely walk away? I mean, I used to look for jobs all the time. So yeah, that's just something to like keep, I guess, like keep your space safe, and don't, if you can, just like get your exit routine in order, because sometimes that just like makes it a little bit easier to like stand up for yourself, because you know, I have a safety net, I know I have an exit plan, I can get out if I have to. So you're not going into a conversation feeling like you're trapped. I think that's the most important thing for having these kind of conversations.
Thanks so much. And I think we've come up to the end of our time, and so we're going to hand it over to Janet. I just wanted to say one last thank you so much for your time and for your generosity. It was so lovely chatting with you guys today.
Thank you. On behalf of Steps Public Art, I wanted to extend my gratitude to all of our wonderful guest panelists for being here today and for sharing this meaningful conversation around the idea of creating comfortable public spaces and challenging those problematic spaces that currently exist through art and community engagement. It was wonderful learning more about your individual practices and how each of you thoughtfully navigate or approach space. I personally very much look forward to following your work into the future as your artworks engage and challenge both physical and digital spaces. Steps would also, of course, like to thank our funders who have helped make this event possible, the City of Toronto and TD Bank Group through their Ready commitment, as well as our wonderful co-host for the evening, NIMAC. And I'll give the floor to Jen to say a few words.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. I feel so grateful for everything that was shared tonight, to Fran, Bracken, and Meagan, but also to the wonderful questions and engagement in the chat. It felt like a really nice evening to be able to spend together and share thoughts and gratitude for each other's work. I think the one thing I am going to take away from this evening is the idea of brave and gentle, which seem to follow through with actually the majority of the things that were talked about. So I thank Bracken for bringing up that idea, but then also just it being enacted over and over again in the ways that the discussion progressed. So NIMAC would like to thank our funders, which are the Canada Council for the Arts, We have some upcoming programming that will begin in the next month or so that I just encourage you to keep an eye on. There'll be a mentorship program being launched soon, as well as some workshops and discussion groups that will be happening over the next probably 6 months. So there's quite a bit that will be happening, which is exciting for us because we've been a little bit quiet for a while. But I want to thank Janet as well at STEPS just for all of the care that she gave in organizing tonight. Yeah, and thanks everyone for attending. Merci.
Thank you.